Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us here on the show. All right, so BYU is going to be active in the transfer portal. I think that goes without saying. But a name you're going to want to know, much like we've talked about already with guys like Leona Lefau, Joshua Dye, two guys we've talked about earlier this week, in terms of portal targets I fully expect BYU to pursue. Well, they all have, some decent ties to Utah or BYU in their own right. But this one like is right at home in Provo, and that would be Walker Lyons. Now, Walker obviously went through a high-profile high school recruiting period. Remember, BYU was in the mix there. He has one of those famous official visit photos that he took with a stuffed cougar up in the Wasatch Mountains. He ultimately committed to USC out of high school, served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think it was like 14 months in Norway, then came home, and he's been playing for USC ever since then. He's had fairly modest statistics. This season alone, he has had 20 receptions, 223 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's in 2025. In 2024, just 6 receptions for 36 yards. So he's played a decent amount at USC, but he's reportedly set to enter the transfer portal, and that is where the BYU conversation begins. Because as many of you know, his younger brother, 4 or 5-star quarterback, depending on which recruiting service you look at, Ryder Lyons, is committed to BYU. He is planning on going on a mission. He's been called to the Orlando, Florida mission, Spanish speaking, and he is expected to enroll at BYU in 2027. But Walker Lyons could end up beating him to Provo, Utah, because Walker, if he does indeed end up entering the transfer portal, I would think that BYU absolutely should and will be in the conversation for him. He is also reportedly dating Dancing with the Stars icon Rylee Arnold. Obviously, her last name is very familiar to many of you out there if you pay attention to Dancing with the Stars or the ballroom dance scene when it comes to Utah, which has got a very strong ballroom dance scene. I didn't know this until recently, but he's dating a native, speaking of Rylee, who's from Utah. I believe she's based here when she's not performing with Dancing on with the Stars. And I think all of this, along with his connections previously to BYU via his family, parents, grandparents, etc., it all kind of seems like it could be lining up for Walker Lyons to, pardon the pun, walk the line and end up in Provo, Utah. We'll see how it all goes, but you think about it, it feels like a very natural fit for the BYU football program. Carsen Ryan just had a really, really strong season and is expected to finish it off, I think, in fine fashion in the Pop-Tarts Bowl down there in Orlando. But then all of a sudden you're back in the conversation of, okay, who's going to be our starting tight end in 2026? And I think that's what Walker Lyons, I'm looking at it saying he's had modest statistics at USC. Could he come to BYU much like Carsen Ryan, who Carsen, I think, would tell you in his heart of hearts that he's been underutilized his entire college career until this season? Could that be Walker Lyons' same story, looking at it saying, you know what? I want to take on a bigger role. I want to have a bigger opportunity. And I think if he's looking at what Carsen Ryan has accomplished at BYU this season, why wouldn't he consider going to BYU? That is why I think this is a very, very natural fit. And yet again, goes to the point that BYU, they would have loved to have had Walker Lyons commit to them out of high school. And at that point, BYU is in a circumstance where he felt like, hey, I need to go to a bigger program. But they kept the relationship strong and obviously helped them when it came to landing his younger brother, Ryder. But now, in a circuitous, roundabout way, it may lead him to playing in Provo, Utah. And the difference here is Walker could have 2 years of eligibility remaining versus just the 1 year for Carsen Ryan. I think this is a really, really nice fit. I think that a guy like Walker Lyons, having played in a really, really strong offensive system at USC, while he may not be the what I consider the most well-rounded tight end prospect, speaking of doing what Carsen Ryan does, and that means like block as well as anybody I've seen block at the tight end position in quite some time. Walker is still a willing blocker, but he obviously would have some pass receiving chops that I think BYU could very easily utilize in this offense. That doesn't mean that they couldn't also see guys like Noah Moyaki step up and Kean Need step up and really take that next step at the tight end position for BYU. But if you're looking at it, you can never go wrong with having as much talent as you possibly can have in this program. And any of you who remember Walker Lyons coming out of high school, he was a bona fide 4-star prospect, top 100 type guy. I think he ended up in maybe in the 100, so maybe a top 150. There is a lot of talent there. And based on his statistics from USC, you would like to think that a little bit remains untapped. And could that be where Aaron Roderick and the BYU offense step into the chat here and really kind of point to, hey, we got Carsen Ryan really unlocked in this offense. We envision you having a similar type impact in our program. And in fact, considering you have 2 years of eligibility remaining, you could have a bigger impact because you'd be able to impact the program for multiple years in a row. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really, really solid selling point for BYU. And also, the other thing that sells BYU right now is they're winning. They're winning at a high level. I'm not saying that USC is not winning at a high level. USC was also kind of on the periphery of the playoff conversation. And Lincoln Riley obviously has got a really, really strong program down there in Southern California. But I think with Walker Lyons entering the portal, I don't proclaim to know what he's thinking, but it seems way too natural of a fit for him not to be playing in a BYU uniform this time next year, 9 months from now, when BYU kicks off the 2026 season. Now, the portal, I might remind you guys, for those of you tuning in who aren't aware, it is not officially open until January 2nd. So no formal declarations of, hey, I'm going to Provo, Utah, I'm committing to BYU from Walker Lyons. Those can't happen until the portal window actually opens. But I think it's kind of the dirty secret right now is there is a trickle, if not a steady stream of these names talking about they're going to enter the portal. It's just par for the course. And they made the one single transfer window, which is going to go from January 2nd to January 12th. And I understand why the coaches wanted it, but it's also, I talk about the law of unintended consequences. Well, now you got guys opting out of bowl games and announcing they're going into the portal when they can't actually go into the portal quite yet, but they're stepping away from their college programs and already beginning to evaluate their options, whether they're talking with their agents, their family members. There's back channel communication with opposing, or not opposing, but different colleges out there in terms of, hey, would you have interest in our guy? That's all happening right now. And it's affecting, I think, bowl preparations for teams. And you know what? You created the window, and this is what you're going to have to deal with guys opting out of the bowl game because they're looking for bigger opportunities. It's nothing that Walker Lyons can control. If he decides that it's in his best interest to explore his options, and yeah, he very easily could end up back at USC if he decides that he wants to stick around in LA. But I also think about it from this perspective, speaking from the BYU side of things, that it seems like a really, really solid fit, a really natural addition. And the fact that he's got the family ties with his younger brother already being committed to this program, like I said, it seems way too easy for this to happen. And for him, in theory, to be your projected tight end number one going into the 2026 season, understanding that, yeah, hopefully he would be able to be enrolled for spring ball to compete with the Noah Moyaki, Kean Need, and the other tight ends on BYU's roster right now. But I really do think that this would be a nice addition for BYU, and we'll see how it all goes. But Walker Lyons, the Lyons family, he could actually beat his brother to Provo, Utah, if he decides that BYU is where he is going to be next year. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. As always, thank you for all of your support. You guys are absolutely awesome. Coming up tomorrow, we are going to talk about the situation BYU finds itself in. Second straight year, right there on kind of the edge of making the college football playoff. Could it affect BYU's psyche, their mentality going into this game against Georgia Tech? We'll get into that. We'll also get you ready for BYU and Abilene Christian with TNT in town to broadcast that game tomorrow night at the Marriott Center. So a lot to talk about on tomorrow's edition of the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Make sure you subscribe, rate and review the show, and share it with your family and friends. And also, if you need a last-minute holiday gift or someone keeps asking what you want, make it easy. Ask them for a membership to the Everydayer Club. You get ad-free episodes of this show, exclusive Discord server access, and more. Subscriptions can be gifted through lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right. So as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Now go make our friends over the Locked On College Football podcast your second listen of the day. And come back tomorrow, by the way, and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.